My husband ordered me to apologize to his female best friend because my honesty hurt her feelings. When I refused, he threatened, "Apologize or I'll divorce you." I agreed, but at her house, I looked her in the eye and said something before her husband that made them both understand why women like me never kneel before falsehood. My husband stood in front of me, arms crossed, and delivered a chilling ultimatum. "Apologize to Scarlett, or I'll divorce you." He thought he was giving me a choice, but he was actually handing me the perfect weapon to detonate his entire life. Main story. His face was a mask I'd come to dread, that condescending look that said I was the unreasonable one, the jealous wife, impossible to please. It made me question everything, even my own sanity, even when my gut screamed the truth. I stared at him, this stranger in my living room, this man I'd promised forever to, and a cold realization hit me. I didn't recognize him anymore. Or maybe, just maybe, I'd never truly known him at all. The Mason I thought I married would never demand I apologize to his best friend for simply noticing their inappropriate relationship. The Mason I loved would never gaslight me, making me feel crazy for pointing out the gaping hole in our marriage that Scarlett Pierce had carved out for herself. "You want me to apologize to her?" I heard my own voice, eerily calm despite the volcanic rage churning inside. "For what, exactly?" "For treating her with suspicion and coldness since the day you met her." Mason's voice rose, sharp and accusatory, as if he was the victim here. "For making her feel unwelcome in our lives. For being so jealous you can't accept I have a meaningful friendship outside our marriage." He pushed on. "Scarlett's been nothing but kind to you, and you've hurt her feelings with your constant attitude. She deserves an apology. And if you can't give her that, then I don't know if I can stay in this marriage." Something snapped inside me then. Not heartbreak, not yet. That would come later. This was something colder, sharper, a sudden, piercing clarity. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to how it all began, back to when I still believed in the beautiful lie Mason and I were building together. I'm Arya Montgomery, and for 5 years, I honestly thought I had a rock-solid marriage. We met at a summer barbecue, one of those perfect July afternoons where everything just feels possible. He was by the drink cooler, and when I walked up, he gave me this genuine smile that instantly made me forget all the play it cool rules. We talked for 3 hours straight, sitting on the back porch steps, the party swirling around us. He listened when I talked about my graphic design work, asked thoughtful questions about my creative process. He wasn't like other guys who just waited for their turn to talk about themselves. He actually seemed interested in me. That's what really got me, you know? The details. On our first real date, he remembered I took my coffee with just a splash of cream and no sugar. He'd surprised me with bookstore dates because I'd mentioned loving the smell of new books. He made me feel seen, truly seen, in a way I'd never experienced before. Like he was interested in who I was, not who he wanted me to be. 2 years later, we got married. A small, intimate ceremony in a garden venue. String lights, wildflowers, mason jars. It was perfect. I wore a simple ivory dress, and Mason, my strong, steady Mason, cried during his vows. My mom even pulled me aside at the reception, whispering she'd never seen me look happier. We settled into our 2-bedroom apartment, kids riding bikes on the sidewalk, neighbors knowing names. I worked from home, freelancing, and Mason commuted downtown. We split bills, cooked together, laughed over burnt dinners. We talked about buying a house, having kids, traveling the world. Life felt stable, predictable, comfortable. Everything I'd been taught to value. I thought I knew exactly who I'd married, and exactly what our future looked like. Looking back, I realized I was living in a carefully constructed illusion. I only saw what Mason wanted me to see. The illusion started to crack about 6 months into our marriage. Mason came home one evening practically buzzing with excitement. He sat me down on the couch and told me his college best friend, Scarlett, was moving back to town. He described her with this nostalgic warmth, a kind of glow that, at first, seemed innocent enough. She was brilliant, charismatic, one of those people who could sell ice to an Eskimo and make them feel grateful. His closest friend during college, part of a tight-knit group that solved the world's problems late into the night. And honestly, I was happy for him. Everyone needs good friends, especially the ones who knew you before you became you. I had my own college friends scattered across the country. I thought, great, this will be good for him. Then I met Scarlett at a dinner Mason organized. She was exactly as he described, polished, confident, professionally dressed even for a casual Friday. Highlighted hair, expensive jewelry. She had that practiced client meeting smile, warm, but slightly impersonal. The kind that welcomes you, but doesn't quite see you. What struck me was how easily she and Mason fell into their old rhythm. They laughed about professors I'd never met, reminisced about road trips I hadn't been on, finished each other's sentences. I sat there, smiling, nodding, trying to join in when the conversation briefly swung my way. But mostly, I felt like an observer, watching a reunion I wasn't a part of. It wasn't hostile, not intentionally. It was just their shared history was a language I didn't speak. Inside jokes, references that flew right over my head. Scarlett's husband, Elijah, was there too. Quiet. An accountant. He seemed just as peripheral as I was. At one point, our eyes met across the table while Mason and Scarlett were lost in some memory from sophomore year. We shared a brief, knowing look. I didn't fully understand it then, but I would. Oh, I would. The first small boundary violation happened so subtly, I almost missed it. A few weeks later, Scarlett started texting Mason during our date nights. The first time we were at the movies. His phone buzzed. He typed a quick response. Put it away. 5 minutes later, it buzzed again. Then again. By the time the movie started, he'd exchanged a dozen messages with Scarlett about a work presentation she was nervous about. He'd apologize each time, promise to put it away, but his phone and Scarlett just kept pulling his attention like a magnetic force he couldn't resist. This became a pattern. Dinner dates interrupted by client texts. Weekend mornings shattered by phone calls about Scarlett's marriage problems with Elijah. Late evenings, Mason typing away while we supposedly watched TV together. Every time I gently suggested he text her back later, Mason would look at me with barely concealed disappointment, as if I was failing some fundamental test of understanding. Then came the spare key incident. Mason gave Scarlett a key to our apartment for emergencies without ever discussing it with me. I found out one Tuesday afternoon when I walked out of my home office to find Scarlett sitting on our couch, shoes off, completely at home in my space, while Mason made her coffee. She needed our I-5 for a client call, she cheerfully explained, as if this was a normal, recurring pattern I should have known about. I stood there in my own living room, feeling like an intruder, while Scarlett chatted with Mason about her sales territory, her commission structures. When she finally left, I asked Mason if maybe we could establish some boundaries. Suggest that Scarlett text before just showing up. His response was immediate and defensive. Scarlett was going through a difficult transition, he explained, with exaggerated patience. New city, struggling marriage, high-pressure job. Real friends, he said, showed up for each other without conditions or restrictions. Was I really going to be the kind of person who put convenience over compassion? That conversation became the template for dozens more. Every time I tried to establish a boundary, Mason reframed it. I was unwelcoming, jealous, unable to handle his friendships. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if I was the possessive one. Maybe this was what mature adult friendships looked like, and I was just too insecure to handle it. Our 5th anniversary arrived on a Tuesday in late September. I'd made reservations 2 months in advance at Meridian, an elegant restaurant downtown known for its intimate atmosphere. I wore the emerald dress Mason had complimented years ago, the one he'd said made my eyes look like sea glass. I'd planned the entire evening, dinner, a walk along the river where we had one of our first real conversations, then home where I had a gift waiting, a leather-bound photo album documenting our entire relationship. We were halfway through our appetizers when Mason's phone started buzzing. Incessantly. Once. Twice. 5 times in rapid succession. Each notification fractured his attention a little more, until he was barely present, his eyes glued to the screen. I sat across from him, watching myself become invisible in real time. Mason, I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. It's our anniversary. He looked up, a genuine confusion clouding his face. Scarlett's having a crisis, he said. I'm just letting her know she's not alone. But I was alone. Sitting across from my husband at an expensive restaurant on what should have been one of the most important nights of our year, while he provided emotional support to another woman. The irony was suffocating. Bitter in my mouth, mixing with food I could barely swallow. That night, lying in bed while Mason slept peacefully beside me, I finally admitted the truth I'd been avoiding for months. My marriage had 3 people in it, and I was the least important one. By the way, if you're still with me, still shaking your head at how easily a person can be gaslit, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It's free, and it helps me share more stories about finding your voice and standing up for yourself. Okay, back to the unfolding nightmare. 3 months passed after that anniversary dinner. 3 months of me trying to convince myself I was overreacting. That Mason's relationship with Scarlett was just an unusually close friendship. That my discomfort was my own issue. 3 months of swallowing my instincts and forcing smiles while Scarlett continued using her spare key to drop by unannounced, and Mason continued prioritizing her texts over our conversations. Then my laptop died. On a Wednesday morning in early December. Right in the middle of a critical client project. The screen went black without warning. I had roughly 6 hours to finish a major presentation that could lead to a long-term contract. Panic set in. I needed my files, and I needed them fast. Mason's laptop sat in his home office. He'd told me dozens of times I could use it if I ever needed to. We don't have secrets from each other, he'd said. What's mine is yours. I grabbed it without hesitation, powered it up, and logged into my cloud storage. The presentation loaded quickly, and I dove back into work, racing against the clock. About an hour in, I needed to reference our tax documents. Mason kept all our financial paperwork organized on his laptop. I opened his file explorer and navigated to where he usually kept our shared documents. That's when I saw it, buried among work files and random downloads, in a way that suggested it was deliberately hidden, but not quite well enough. A folder labeled personal_private. Something about those two words together made my stomach clench with an instinctual dread. Mason and I didn't keep secrets. Or so I believed. So why a private folder on a laptop he said I could use freely? My hands trembled slightly as I moved the cursor. Part of me knew I should close the laptop and ask him later. Part of me desperately hoped it was something innocent. Maybe a surprise birthday plan. Or sensitive work documents. I clicked it open. The folder contained hundreds of files. Photos. Screenshots. Documents spanning back 3 years. My eyes tried to make sense of what I was seeing, my brain scrambling to categorize before the emotional impact could hit. Mason and Scarlett, sitting across from each other at restaurant tables I didn't recognize. Leaning in close, conversation far more intimate than casual friendship. Candid shots of Scarlett laughing, her face glowing with genuine joy. Selfies of the two of them, his arm around her shoulders, both smiling like they shared something precious, private. And then the screenshots. Dozens of them. Text message conversations. I clicked on the first screenshot. My hands had gone numb. Timestamp. 2 o'clock in the morning, 6 months ago. Scarlett had written a long paragraph about feeling lost in her marriage to Elijah, about wondering if she'd made the right choices, about missing the connection she used to feel with people who truly understood her. Mason's response was equally long, validating every feeling, sharing his own thoughts about paths not taken and connections that transcend normal friendship boundaries. I opened another screenshot a year ago. Late night again. Scarlett writing about not being able to sleep, thinking about different versions of her life. Mason responding with understanding, confessing his own what-ifs, regrets he couldn't share with most people. My client deadline? Completely forgotten. I sat frozen, clicking through screenshot after screenshot, watching a hidden relationship unfold in excruciating detail. These weren't casual check-ins about weekend plans. These were emotional confessions. Intimate, late-night conversations where two people shared their deepest feelings, regrets, and longings. Then I found the message. The one that would replay in my mind for months, burned into my memory with the precision of acid-etching glass. Scarlett sent it at 2:17 a.m., about 8 months ago, right around the time Mason had started seeming distant and preoccupied. It read, "Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if we'd gotten together, instead of just staying friends back in college. Do you ever think about that?" Mason's response came just 3 minutes later, suggesting he'd been awake, waiting for her message. Or that he'd been thinking about her at 2 a.m. instead of sleeping next to his wife. His reply, "More than I probably should, but we made our choices. Doesn't mean I don't value what we have now." I read those words 3 times. 4 times. 5 times. Hoping they would magically rearrange themselves into something less devastating, something that could be explained away as innocent. But the meaning was crystal clear. My husband had feelings for Scarlett that went far beyond friendship. He'd been thinking about an alternative life where they were together, and he valued what they had now, whatever that secret connection was, enough to maintain it through years of hidden communication. The worst part? That 2:20 a.m. timestamp. While I'd been sleeping in our bed, probably worried about some mundane task, Mason had been awake, engaged in emotional intimacy with another woman, discussing hypothetical romantic relationships they could have had. I couldn't stop digging now. Pandora's box was open, and I needed to see everything, no matter how much it hurt. I closed the screenshots and opened our joint credit card statements through his bookmarked online banking portal. I started searching for patterns. Every Tuesday afternoon for the past 2 years, a charge appeared at Riverbend Cafe, an upscale bistro downtown. A place Mason had never once mentioned or suggested we visit. The amounts were consistently $50 to $70. The kind of total for 2 people having a nice lunch with drinks. Far more than he'd spend on a casual meal for himself. I opened Mason's digital calendar. Plain as day once I knew to look. Lunch meeting. Every Tuesday at noon. No other details. Just a vague 2-hour block there for years. I cross-referenced the Riverbend Cafe charges with the photos in his hidden folder. They matched perfectly. The photos of Mason and Scarlett at restaurant tables? Taken at those Tuesday lunches. While I'd been at home, working on freelance projects, eating leftovers at my desk, assuming my husband was grabbing a quick bite between meetings, he'd been on weekly, secret lunch dates with Scarlett. Dates that required 2 full hours. Significant money. A pattern maintained for years. This wasn't occasional friendly catch-ups. This was deliberate, sustained, carefully planned deception. Mason had been building a parallel emotional life with Scarlett. Standing dates, intimate late-night conversations, shared secrets. All while coming home to me and acting like everything was normal. I sat at that desk for 2 hours straight. My client presentation? Completely abandoned. The deadline passing unnoticed. I read every screenshot, documented every suspicious charge, looked at every photo, studying their body language, their facial expressions, seeing things I dismissed before when I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. The evidence wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't a few questionable texts. This was years of documented emotional intimacy, financial proof of secret meetings, photographic evidence of a relationship that crossed every boundary a married person should respect. What made it all worse was the sudden, brutal clarity of how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. Every single time I'd expressed discomfort about Scarlett, Mason had made me the problem. He'd called me jealous, possessive, insecure, unable to handle mature adult friendships. He'd positioned himself as the patient, reasonable partner, trying to help his wife work through her unfounded suspicions. He'd made me question my own perceptions until I actually started to believe my discomfort was a personal failing. But my instincts had been screaming the truth the entire time. Every uncomfortable feeling, every moment of suspicion, every time I'd felt like the third wheel in my own marriage, all of it was an accurate perception of a reality Mason was actively hiding from me, while gaslighting me into thinking I was imagining problems that didn't exist. I finally understood why Mason defended Scarlett so fiercely, why he prioritized her texts, why he gave her a spare key without asking me, why he looked at me with disappointment when I suggested their friendship was unhealthy. Because in his mind, I wasn't his priority.
Scarlett was.
I was the obligation, the legal wife, the person he came home to out of commitment. Scarlett was the person he thought about at 2 a.m., the person he carved out special time for, the person he shared his deepest feelings with. I had become the third wheel in my own marriage, and the undeniable evidence was spread across Mason's laptop screen. I sat at that desk, staring at the wreckage of his betrayal, until the afternoon light faded and shadows stretched across the room. My client deadline was long gone. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't read. None of it mattered anymore. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I found a USB drive and methodically copied everything. Every photo, every screenshot of those late-night confessions, every credit card statement. I organized it all into clearly labeled folders, building a case like a lawyer preparing for trial. When I finished, I sat back. I expected tears, or rage, or the kind of emotional collapse you see in movies. Instead, I felt a strange, chilling calm. The kind that comes after shock wears off and you realize you're standing in ruins that can't be rebuilt. There was almost relief in it, knowing I hadn't been crazy, that my instincts had been right all along. I looked at the clock. 3:45 p.m. Mason would be home around 6:30, expecting dinner, expecting normal. And I decided to give him exactly that. At least at first. I wanted to see if he could sit across from me, pretend everything was fine, knowing what he'd been hiding. I went to the kitchen and started preparing dinner. Chicken with roasted vegetables, one of his favorites. I set the table, put on background music, creating an illusion of normalcy in our apartment that suddenly felt like a stage set. Mason walked through the door at 6:02 p.m., right on schedule. He looked tired, his tie loosened, hair messed from running his hands through it. He smiled when he saw me in the kitchen, kissed my cheek, like he had thousands of times. "Something smells good," he said, heading to change. "Rough day with that client presentation?" "You could say that," I replied, my voice steady. He didn't know I'd spent the day discovering his emotional affair. I let him decompress for 15 minutes, enough time to change, pour himself a glass of wine, and settle onto the couch with his phone. I watched him scroll, probably texting Scarlett, completely oblivious. Then I walked over, his laptop already open to that hidden folder. I sat in the armchair across from him, the coffee table a barrier between us. I turned the screen so he could see it clearly, and asked the simplest question I could formulate. "What is this?" Mason looked up from his phone, confusion crossing his face. Then I watched recognition hit him. His eyes widened, his mouth opened, but no words came out. For 3 seconds, raw panic flashed across his features. Then it was
gone,
replaced by something harder. Defensiveness. "You went through my private files?" His voice rose with immediate indignation. "Arya, what the hell? Those are my personal things. You had no right to go snooping through my laptop." The audacity. He wasn't denying the contents. He wasn't apologizing. His first instinct was to make me the villain. "I was using your laptop because mine crashed during a work deadline," I said, keeping my voice level. "I needed to access our tax documents." and I found a folder labeled private that contained evidence of a years-long emotional affair with Scarlett.
So, yes.
I looked, and now I'm asking you to explain it. Mason set down his wine glass with a thud. There's nothing to explain. You're misinterpreting a friendship because you've never been able to handle me being close with Scarlett. This is exactly the kind of jealous behavior I've been trying to be patient with for months. Something cold settled in my chest. He was actually going to try to gaslight me, with the evidence right there between us. Mason, I read the text messages. I saw the photos from your secret Tuesday lunch dates. I found the credit card charges at Riverbend Cafe every single week for 2 years. This isn't me misinterpreting friendship. This is you having an emotional affair and lying about it. It's not an affair. He stood up, pacing, his voice taking on that exasperated tone he used when explaining something he thought should be obvious. Scarlett and I are close friends. We have been since college. Yes, we talk about deep things. Yes, we meet for lunch regularly. That's what real friendship looks like, Arya. Deep connection, emotional honesty, mutual support. Just because you don't have friendships like that doesn't mean they're inappropriate. Every sentence was a meticulously constructed deflection, reframing his betrayal as my inadequacy. I'd heard these tactics before, but never so blatantly. Never when hard evidence sat between us, proving he was lying. She texted you at 2 a.m. I said, my voice harder now, asking if you ever thought about what life would have been like if you'd gotten together instead of staying friends. And you responded that you thought about it more than you probably should. That's not friendship, Mason. That's emotional infidelity. You're twisting things.
He stopped pacing.
Taking private conversations out of context and building some narrative in your head because you're insecure about my friendships. Scarlett and I talk about hypothetical scenarios sometimes. That doesn't mean anything inappropriate is happening. The argument continued for 2 hours, circling the same points. Mason deflecting, reframing every piece of evidence. He had an explanation for everything. Late-night texts were just friends supporting each other. Secret lunches were catch-ups he didn't mention because he knew I'd react badly. Intimate conversations were normal for people with history. Every time I pointed out how he'd crossed boundaries, he countered that I was the one with the problem. Too jealous, too possessive, too insecure. I was exhausted from defending reality against his revised version of it. My head throbbed from the circular logic. But I kept pushing, because I needed him to acknowledge the truth, to stop lying, to take responsibility. That's when Mason delivered the statement that would seal the fate of our marriage. He stood in the middle of our living room, arms crossed, jaw set. His voice took on that patronizing tone again, the one that suggested he was the adult dealing with a difficult child. If anything, Arya, you owe Scarlett an apology. The words hung in the air. I stared at him, genuinely shocked into silence. She has been nothing but kind to you, he continued, warming to his argument. She's tried to include you, tried to be friendly, and you've treated her with suspicion and coldness since the day you met her. She knows you don't like her. She's told me it hurts her feelings how you act around her, how you always try to limit our friendship. He was actually doing this, making his emotional affair partner the victim, and me, the aggressor, who needed to apologize. You want me to apologize to her? I heard my own voice, oddly calm despite the rage now surging. For what, exactly? For noticing that my husband was having an emotional affair? For being uncomfortable with inappropriate boundaries? For trusting my instincts when you've spent months trying to convince me they were wrong? For being jealous and possessive and unable to handle me having close friendships? Mason's voice rose. For making Scarlett feel unwelcome and judged when she's done nothing wrong? She deserves an apology, and if you can't give her that, then I seriously need to reconsider this marriage. The room went absolutely silent. Even the background music seemed to fade. Mason stood there, arms crossed, expression set, clearly believing he held all the power. He thought he was calling my bluff, forcing me to choose between my pride and my marriage, making me bend to his will, like he'd been doing for months with smaller things. He had no idea what he'd just done. Something shifted inside me in that silence.
Cold. Clear.
Absolutely certain. I looked at my husband, this man who was demanding I apologize to his emotional affair partner for the crime of noticing their inappropriate relationship, and I realized he just handed me the perfect weapon. If Mason wanted an apology, he would get one. Just not the kind he was expecting. I let the silence stretch, watching him in his self-righteous certainty. Then I spoke, in a voice much calmer than I felt. Fine. Mason's expression shifted to surprise. He'd clearly expected more argument. I'll apologize to Scarlett. I continued, my tone completely reasonable. But let's do it properly. At her house. With Elijah there too. If I'm going to apologize for hurting her feelings, I want to do it right. In front of both of our spouses, so everyone can hear what I have to say. Mason's face lit up with relief, and something disturbingly like triumph. He actually smiled, believing he'd won. That he'd successfully broken me into compliance. Really? You'll do that? His voice was eager, pleased with himself. Absolutely, I said. Schedule it for this Saturday evening. I want to make sure everyone's there. I'll prepare what I want to say. Mason nodded enthusiastically, already pulling out his phone to text Scarlett. I watched him type, watched his face relax for the first time all evening, and felt nothing but cold clarity. He had no idea what I was actually planning. No comprehension that he just arranged the perfect stage for me to detonate the truth in front of everyone who needed to hear it. Mason spent the rest of that evening texting Scarlett, his face glowing with satisfaction. I watched him from across the room, this man who believed he'd just won some significant victory, and felt nothing but chilling determination settling deeper into my bones. The next morning, Thursday, I woke with absolute clarity about what needed to happen before Saturday evening. Mason left for work, kissing my forehead, reminding me to think about my apology. The moment his car pulled out, I returned to his laptop. I spent 3 hours meticulously documenting everything. Detailed screenshots of every damaging conversation, organized chronologically, showing a clear progression. Early messages 3 years ago were friendly enough, but then they gradually shifted. Incrementally. By the second year, Scarlett was texting him late at night about feeling disconnected from Elijah, about missing emotional intimacy. Mason responded with paragraphs validating every feeling, sharing his own struggles with feeling truly seen. They started using pet names, saying things like, "You always know exactly what I need to hear," or "I don't know what I'd do without you in my life." I organized it all into folders by year and month, creating an undeniable timeline. Then, the financial evidence. Our joint credit card statements, highlighting every Tuesday lunch charge at Riverbend Cafe for the past 2 years. I calculated the total. Over $7,000 spent on secret meals with another woman while we were supposedly saving for a house down payment. Then I found something that made my stomach churn in a different way. Buried in Mason's email inbox were receipts for gifts he'd purchased for Scarlett. A designer silk scarf from Nordstrom for her birthday last year, $250. ANEXPENSIVEBOTTLEOFFRENCHERPROMOTION, $250. An expensive Botley offering coin for her promotion, $180. Flowers delivered to her office for a major deal, $75, with a card that read, "Always knew you could do it. So proud of you." These weren't casual friend gestures. These were gifts for someone you were romantically involved with, someone whose achievements mattered deeply to you. The card messages crossed every professional and platonic boundary. I printed everything, created digital backups in 3 separate cloud accounts Mason couldn't access, saved copies to 2 different USB drives, hidden in separate locations. I wasn't taking any chances. By Thursday afternoon, I had an airtight case. But I had one more thing to do. Something that required courage I wasn't entirely sure I possessed. I needed to call Elijah Pierce. I sat at our kitchen table, staring at my phone for 10 minutes before finally pulling up his contact. Mason had it saved from all the double dates. I'd probably spoken to Elijah fewer than a dozen times. He was quiet, reserved. But I'd seen something in his eyes lately, a resigned awareness, suggesting he knew more than he was saying. The same look I'd probably been wearing myself. My finger hovered over the call button. Part of me wondered if this was too far. Should I just let Saturday happen? But the other part of me, the part that had been gaslit and manipulated for months, knew Elijah deserved a warning. He deserved to know his world was about to change. I pressed call. He answered on the 3rd ring. "This is Elijah." "Hi, Elijah. It's Arya Montgomery, Mason's wife." My voice was steady. A brief pause. "Arya, is everything okay? I'm calling because Mason has arranged for me to come to your house on Saturday evening to apologize to Scarlett. He insisted it happen in front of both of you, and I wanted to make sure you'd be home for it." Another pause. Longer. I could almost hear him processing the layers of meaning. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. More alert. Focused. "I'll be there." No questions about the apology. No confusion about why I was calling him directly. Just immediate understanding. "Thank you," I said quietly. Then, because he needed to understand what was really happening, I added, "I think there are some things you should know. Things that have been going on that you might have suspected, but didn't have proof of." The silence on the other end was heavy with recognition. Finally, Elijah's voice, barely above a whisper. "Thank you for calling me." Those 5 words carried the weight of years of suspicion. Of being told he was paranoid. Of watching his wife's affection directed elsewhere while being made to feel like he was the problem. "You deserve to know the truth," I said. "We both do." "I'll be there Saturday," he repeated. "And Arya, whatever you're planning to say, I'm ready to hear it." We hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling the weight of what I'd just set in motion. Elijah knew. He'd be prepared. Alert. Waiting for the truth I was about to reveal. Mason came home that evening in an excellent mood. He'd apparently had lunch with Scarlett that day. Their regular Tuesday shifted to Thursday. He talked enthusiastically about how grateful Scarlett was that I'd agreed to apologize, how much it would mean to her to clear the air, how this would strengthen all of our relationships moving forward. I nodded and smiled, internally reviewing the evidence. Friday was more of the same. Mason coached me repeatedly on what to say. He'd written out bullet points on his phone. Acknowledge my jealousy. Admit I'd misinterpreted their friendship. Thank Scarlett for her patience. Express gratitude that she'd give me another chance. He even suggested an expensive bottle of wine as a peace offering. Really show her you're serious about making amends, he'd earnestly said. I agreed to everything. I practiced the humble facial expressions he suggested. I asked clarifying questions about tone and body language, making him think I was genuinely preparing for the apology he'd scripted. With each coaching session, Mason's confidence visibly grew. His shoulders relaxed. He smiled more easily. He truly believed he'd successfully trained his wife to perform a public submission that would cement his emotional affair partner's permanent priority in his life. Friday evening, he actually hugged me. I'm proud of you for being mature enough to work through your issues. I hugged him back, feeling the unfamiliar weight of deliberate deception. I'd never been good at lying, but something had shifted inside me since discovering that folder. I'd learned from the master. That night, I lay in bed next to Mason, listening to him breathe, completely unaware that tomorrow would detonate his carefully constructed world. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind circled through my plan, examining it from every angle. Was I becoming vindictive? Was public humiliation the answer? Or was I just hurt and lashing out? Did Elijah really deserve to have his marriage destroyed in front of witnesses? Shouldn't I have found a gentler way? But every time doubt crept in, I remembered Mason's face, illuminated by his phone, at our anniversary dinner. The disappointed looks when I tried to set boundaries. The patient, patronizing tone. The way he'd made me question my own sanity, all while maintaining a hidden emotional affair that proved I'd been right all along. I thought about all the women who stay silent because truth makes others uncomfortable, who apologize for being right because it's easier, who shoulder blame for other people's betrayals. And I realized, what I was planning wasn't petty revenge. It was justice.
Clarity.
The kind of truth-telling that shatters comfortable lies. When dawn finally broke through our bedroom window, painting the walls with pale gold light, I got up. Absolute certainty. I wasn't nervous anymore.
I wasn't second-guessing.
I was ready to deliver the apology Mason had demanded, just not the one he'd scripted. Saturday had arrived, and by evening, everyone would finally know the truth. Saturday arrived with clear skies, a warmth that belonged more to early September than late October. I spent the morning moving through our apartment like someone preparing for battle. Mason, of course, interpreted my quiet focus as nervousness about the apology. He kept reassuring me that everything would be fine, that Scarlett was genuinely looking forward to clearing the air, that this evening would mark a new beginning for all of us. I let him believe whatever he needed to believe. By 5 p.m, I was dressed in a simple navy dress, respectful, understated. Nothing too dramatic, nothing too casual. Mason had picked out the expensive French wine that morning, a bottle that cost more than a week's groceries. He wrapped it carefully, treating it like some peace offering that would seal our reconciliation. We left our apartment at 6:15 p.m. for the 25-minute drive to Scarlett and Elijah's house. Mason insisted we take his car, arrive together, presenting a united front. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other patting my knee, what he thought was comforting reassurance. He talked the entire drive about how meaningful this was, how proud he was of me for being mature, how our marriage would be so much stronger. I watched the suburban streets slide by, brick townhouses, small yards, families enjoying the unseasonably warm evening. Everything looked so normal, so ordinary. None of them had any idea that in one of those similar-looking houses, their lives were about to detonate. Mason kept glancing at me, a hopeful expression mixed with barely concealed nervousness. He probably wondered if I'd actually go through with his scripted apology, or if I'd back out at the last minute and embarrass him. He searched my face for rebellion. I gave him nothing. My expression remained neutral, maybe a touch anxious, like someone about to have an uncomfortable but necessary conversation. I held the wine bag carefully. I nodded when he talked. I smiled when he squeezed my knee. I was the picture of a contrite wife, ready to make amends. When we pulled up to Scarlett and Elijah's house at exactly 6:40 p.m., all the interior lights were blazing. Through the large front windows, I could see Scarlett moving around, arranging something on their coffee table. Even from the car, I could tell she'd gone to effort for this occasion, setting the stage for what she believed would be her validation and my public submission. Mason parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment. Then he turned to me, an expression of such genuine emotion that I almost felt sorry for him. "Thank you for doing this," he said quietly. "I know it's not easy, but this means everything to me, Arya. Everything. Our marriage is going to be so much stronger after tonight. You'll see." I looked at my husband. This man who had gaslit me for months, who had demanded I apologize to his affair partner for the crime of noticing, who genuinely believed this evening would strengthen our marriage by cementing another woman's permanent priority in his life. "I know it will," I said, and squeezed his hand back. That was the last moment Mason would look at me with trust or affection. Though he didn't know it yet. We walked up to the front door. Mason carried the wine. He rang the doorbell, though Scarlett was already heading toward us. She opened the door before the chime finished, her smile wide, barely concealing her smugness. She looked perfect, of course. Designer jeans, silk blouse, effortlessly elegant. Her highlighted hair, flawless makeup. She'd clearly dressed for this occasion, like someone expecting to be photographed for a lifestyle magazine spread on gracious living. "Mason."
Arya.
"Come in." Her voice was warm, welcoming, playing the gracious host. She was genuinely happy to see me. She stepped aside, gesturing us in. "I'm so glad we're doing this. Really, clearing the air will be good for all of us." Mason handed her the wine. Scarlett made appropriate appreciative noises, though she set it aside without much interest. She was focused on me, studying my face, trying to gauge how thoroughly Mason had broken me. Elijah appeared from the kitchen. The moment our eyes met, I saw everything I needed to know. Alert, watchful, braced for impact. His expression had none of the resigned exhaustion I'd seen at previous gatherings. He knew something significant was about to happen. And unlike Mason and Scarlett, he was prepared for it to be uncomfortable. "Arya." "Mason." He nodded to both of us, his voice neutral. Then his eyes found mine again, for a fraction of a second, and I saw acknowledgement, recognition, maybe even gratitude. We moved into their living room, an unspoken choreography that felt rehearsed, even though none of us had planned it. Scarlett and Elijah settled onto their gray sectional, close enough to appear united, but with enough space between them to suggest distance. Mason and I took matching armchairs across from them, a glass coffee table creating a barrier. The table held wine glasses, a carefully arranged cheese board with expensive selections, small plates. Scarlett had clearly spent time staging the scene, creating the perfect setting for receiving an apology that would validate years of boundary violations. The room itself felt theatrical under the bright lighting, like we were all actors given scripts. Except only I knew what the real plot was about to be. Mason settled into his chair, gave me an encouraging nod. His expression radiated barely contained excitement, mixed with relief. He thought he'd won. He'd cemented Scarlett's priority. Scarlett folded her hands in her lap with gracious expectation, her posture perfect, her expression carefully arranged into magnanimous forgiveness. She was ready to receive my contrition. Elijah leaned back slightly, arms crossed, watching everything with focused intensity. He was the only person in that room, besides me, who understood that something was about to shift. I took a deliberate breath, setting my wine glass on the coffee table. The sound of glass meeting would seemed unnaturally loud. I looked directly at Scarlett, holding her gaze. I began speaking, my voice calm, measured, giving nothing away. "Scarlett, I want to start by saying that Mason was absolutely right." I paused, letting those words settle, watching her smile widen slightly with validation. "I do owe you an apology." Another pause. Scarlett's posture relaxed. Mason's face lit up with relief. Elijah's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. But not for the reasons you think. The atmosphere in that living room shifted so dramatically, I could almost feel the air pressure change. Mason's encouraging smile faltered, froze on his face. Scarlett's expression transformed from gracious acceptance to cautious uncertainty. Elijah leaned forward, his full attention locked on me, every muscle in his body alert. I continued in that same calm, measured voice, not raising my volume, just speaking truth with the kind of clarity that comes from absolute certainty. "I apologize for staying silent when I should have spoken up years ago. I apologize for allowing you and Mason to continue an emotional affair right under my nose while convincing myself I was the crazy one for feeling uncomfortable." Mason tried to interrupt, his voice sharp with warning. "Arya, what are you?" I raised my hand, cutting him off mid-sentence without even looking at him. My eyes stayed locked on Scarlett's face, watching her carefully constructed facade begin to crack. "Let me finish. You demanded an apology. I'm giving you one." I turned to Elijah, whose face had gone completely still. I pulled out my phone, my hand steady despite everything, opened the folder I'd so carefully organized, and began speaking in that same measured tone. I apologized to Elijah, actually, because he deserved to know the truth about his wife long before tonight. For the past 3 years, Mason and Scarlett have been meeting every Tuesday for secret lunch dates at Riverbend Cafe. They've been having late-night text conversations about alternative life choices they wish they'd made together, about intimate regrets and emotional connections that cross every boundary a married person should respect. I handed my phone directly to Elijah, watching his face as he took it with trembling hands. His eyes moved across the screen, reading the first message, then scrolling to the next, then the next. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like he might be sick. But his hands kept moving, kept scrolling, methodically reviewing every piece of evidence. Mason was on his feet now, his voice rising with panic. Elijah, don't listen to this. She's taking things completely out of context. You know how Arya gets about my friendship with Scarlett. She's always been jealous, and now she's trying to destroy. How long? Elijah's voice cut through Mason's explanation like a blade through paper. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. The coldness in those 2 words silenced everything else. He was still looking at my phone, still scrolling, but his question was directed at Scarlett with absolute precision. The room fell into a silence, so complete I could hear someone's watch ticking. Scarlett's mouth opened and closed. Her perfectly composed expression had cracked completely. Tears formed in her carefully made-up eyes. She tried the reflexive denial first, her voice shaking. It's not what it looks like. Mason and I are just close friends. We've always been close. There's nothing physical. Nothing inappropriate has actually happened. Elijah finally looked up from my phone, and the expression on his face made even me take a step back. It wasn't rage, not exactly. Though that was there. It was something colder, more devastating. Recognition. Vindication. Years of suppressed suspicion finally given permission to surface. I didn't ask if you slept with him, Elijah said, his voice still controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of fury that was more frightening than shouting. I asked how long you've been having an emotional affair with Mason while making me feel crazy for noticing. The parallel to my own experience was perfect. We had both been living the same nightmare of gaslighting and manipulation, just from different angles, in different marriages. Both told we were paranoid or insecure, or unable to handle mature adult friendships. Both made to feel like the problem while our spouses maintained an inappropriate relationship right in front of us. Scarlett's facade shattered completely. Tears spilled, ruining her perfect makeup. Elijah, please. You're misunderstanding. We never meant for anything to. 3 years. Elijah's voice was flat, reading from the timestamps on my phone. According to these messages, this has been going on for at least 3 years. 3 years of secret lunches. 3 years of late-night conversations about regretting your life choices. 3 years of you telling him things you never told me. He scrolled further, his jaw tightening. Here's one from 8 months ago where Scarlett asks Mason if he ever thinks about what life would have been like if he'd gotten together instead of staying friends. And Mason responds that he thinks about it more than he probably should. Mason had found his voice again. Instead of apologizing, he went straight into damage control. He stood, his face flushed with anger and humiliation, pointing at me like I was the one who'd committed some unforgivable betrayal. Arya, you're destroying everything. This isn't what I meant when I asked you to apologize. You twisted what I asked you to do. You've taken private conversations completely out of context, and you're using them as weapons to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. His voice cracked with desperation, trying to reframe the entire situation. To make my truth-telling seem like manipulation or revenge, rather than simple honesty. He turned to Elijah, palms up, trying to salvage something. Look, Elijah, you have to understand. Scarlett and I have been close friends since college. We have history. Yes, maybe we talk more than typical friends. Maybe we're more emotionally connected than some people might think is appropriate. But nothing physical has ever happened between us. We've never crossed that line. Arya's jealousy has blown a close friendship completely out of proportion. But Elijah wasn't listening to Mason's revised narrative. He was still scrolling through my phone, reading message after message where Mason and Scarlett crossed boundaries that no amount of explanation could justify. His expression grew colder, more closed, with each screen. It says here you bought her a designer scarf for her birthday, Elijah said quietly, reading from the email receipts I'd included. $250. And expensive wine for her promotion. Flowers sent to her office. He looked up at Scarlett. You told me those flowers were from a grateful client. Scarlett's tears were flowing freely now. Elijah, I can explain how much. Elijah cut her off. How much money has Mason spent on you over the past 3 years while telling me we needed to be more careful with our budget? Mason's attempts to control the narrative were falling apart in real time. The evidence spoke louder than his deflections. And Elijah was clearly someone who trusted facts over explanations. I stood up slowly, smoothing my navy dress, picking up my purse. Mason continued his desperate explanations to an audience that had stopped listening. The time had come for me to leave, to walk away from the explosion I detonated and let it burn through whatever was left. I looked at Mason directly, meeting his eyes for what would probably be the last time with any kind of intimacy. You demanded I apologize for speaking truth. I just did. You told me to do it in front of Elijah.
Done.
You threatened me with divorce if I didn't comply. Well, Mason, consider this my answer to that threat. Then I turned to Elijah. His expression was complex. Painful gratitude, mixed with devastation. Anger at the betrayal mixed with relief at finally having proof he wasn't crazy. I've sent you copies of everything to your email address. All the screenshots, all the financial records, all the evidence you need to make informed decisions about your marriage. You deserve to know the truth, and I'm genuinely sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Mason grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. His grip was tight, his fingers digging into my skin with desperate strength. His voice had shifted from angry to pleading, the desperate quality of someone watching their world collapse. You can't just walk out. We need to talk about this, Arya, please. You're my wife. We can work through this if you just calm down and be reasonable. I pulled my arm free with more force than I'd intended, leaving red marks. I met his eyes one final time.
No, Mason.
You need to talk to your lawyer. Because I'm done being the understanding wife in a 3-person marriage where I was always the least important person. I walked toward the door, without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Scarlett sobbing, her composure completely destroyed. Elijah's cold questions continued. Mason's desperate attempts to explain. But none of it was my problem anymore. I stepped out into the cool October evening air and closed the door, muffling the sounds of their imploding marriages. The suburban street was quiet, peaceful, completely at odds with the devastation I'd just left behind. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, called for a rideshare. My fingers fumbled over the screen. The driver arrived within 10 minutes. I climbed into the back seat, gave him my address, and spent the entire 30-minute drive staring out the window. Houses with lights on, families inside. People living their normal Saturday evenings, completely unaware that in one similar-looking house, their lives had just detonated. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty. I destroyed my own marriage, yes, but also Scarlett and Elijah's. I'd humiliated Mason and Scarlett. I'd handed Elijah information that would haunt him for years. But mostly, I felt relieved. Like I'd finally stopped carrying a weight I hadn't realized was crushing me for so long. When the rideshare dropped me off, I walked through the lobby and up to our floor feeling like I was moving through a different world. I unlocked our door and stepped inside. Immediately, the space felt different. Lighter. Less suffocating. Mason's things were everywhere, his jacket, his shoes, his laptop. But they all felt temporary now, artifacts from a life that had already ended. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and let myself feel the full weight of what came next. I sat there, nursing my wine and waiting. Part of me wondered if Mason would come home at all that night, or if he'd stay at Scarlett's, trying to salvage their fantasy relationship. But a deeper instinct told me he'd be back, if only to try to control the narrative one last time. His key turned in the lock at 1:47 a.m. I'd been watching the clock, existing in that strange suspended state between exhaustion and hyper-awareness. The door opened, and the man who walked in looked nothing like the confident husband who'd left just 5 hours earlier. His face was ravaged, eyes red and swollen, though I'd never seen him cry outside our wedding. His hair stood up where he'd been running his hands through it. His shirt wrinkled. He looked like someone who'd aged a decade in an evening. He stood in the doorway, staring at me. Then he closed the door with careful control and walked into the living room. The look on his face was something I'd never seen before. Equal parts devastation and fury. Grief and rage. All competing for dominance. How could you do that? His voice came out raw, scraped clean of its usual confident tone. How could you humiliate me like that? Destroy my friendship? Share private conversations that you had no right to see in the first place? I took another sip of wine and said nothing. I'd said everything that needed saying at Scarlett's house. Now it was Mason's turn to deal with consequences. He started pacing, jerky and agitated. You violated my privacy. You went through my personal files, read my private messages, and then you weaponized them to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed 2 marriages because you couldn't handle me having a close friendship. This was the anger phase. I recognized it.
Deny. Deflect. Attack.
Make the discoverer of betrayal the villain. I let him pace and rant for 20 minutes, cycling through accusations about my jealousy and insecurity. Then he shifted, sitting down, elbows on knees, hands clasped. Vulnerability. Remorse. Look, I know I made mistakes, he said, his voice softer now. Maybe Scarlett and I got too close. Maybe I didn't set appropriate boundaries. But we can work through this, Arya. We can go to couples therapy. I'll put distance between myself and Scarlett. Whatever you need. Our marriage is worth fighting for. This was the bargaining phase. Promising change. Offering concessions. Trying to negotiate a path forward that minimized his losses. I set down my wine glass and looked at him directly. Mason, I'm filing for divorce. His face went through another rapid evolution. Shock first. Then calculation. Then manipulation. His features arranging themselves into wounded confusion. You're overreacting, he said, that patronizing tone returning. You're emotional right now, understandably, but destroying our marriage over a friendship that you misinterpreted isn't the answer. You're letting your insecurities ruin something good. This is exactly what I was trying to help you work through. Even now, even caught with irrefutable evidence, he was still trying to make this my failing, my insecurity, my misinterpretation, my inability to handle mature adult relationships. I stood up and walked to our bedroom without another word, closing and locking the door behind me. I heard him call after me, try the door handle, then pace for another hour. Around 2 a.m, he finally settled on the couch, probably too exhausted to keep performing. The next morning, he tried yet another approach. The wounded husband. I was done. Done fighting. Done explaining. Done accepting blame. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after I'd detonated our lives at Scarlett's house, I called Victoria Brennan. A colleague had recommended her. A strategic, uncompromising lawyer, unsympathetic to gaslighting spouses. Her office was downtown, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Victoria herself, mid-50s, professionally dressed, had sharp eyes that missed nothing and a direct manner I found immediately reassuring. Our first consultation lasted 2 hours. I showed her everything. The chronological screenshots, the credit card statements, the photos, the gift receipts. Victoria reviewed each piece with focused intensity, occasionally making notes, asking clarifying questions. When she finished, she sat back. Emotional affairs are harder to prove than physical ones, she said, her voice clear. But the documentation you've compiled is exceptionally comprehensive. This shows a clear pattern of deception spanning years, financial evidence of resources diverted outside the marriage, and communication that crosses appropriate boundaries. We can absolutely use this. She laid out her strategy. File for divorce on grounds of marital misconduct. Push for a favorable settlement given his documented deception and emotional RM. Be prepared for him to claim I'd violated his privacy, but counter that I discovered the evidence accidentally, for legitimate work, and the content justified further investigation. He'll try to make you the villain, Victoria said with the confidence of someone who'd seen this dozens of times. He'll claim you're jealous, vindictive, unable to handle his friendships. Don't let him. The evidence speaks for itself. I hired her on the spot. 2 weeks later, I received an email that surprised me. From Elijah Pierce. Subject line. Thank you. I opened it with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He explained he'd filed for divorce the Monday after our confrontation. Armed with the evidence I provided, he wrote about years of suspecting something was wrong, but convincing himself he was paranoid. That Scarlett's friendship with Mason was innocent, even when his gut screamed otherwise. My apology had given him both validation and proof. The evidence had made it impossible for Scarlett to deny or minimize. He asked if we could meet for coffee, carefully clarifying it wasn't romantic or complicated. He just wanted to talk with someone who understood what it felt like to be the third priority in your own marriage. To be gaslit into doubting your own perceptions. I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. Elijah looked different. The resigned exhaustion was gone, replaced by something more solid. He looked like someone who'd finally stopped carrying a crushing weight. Our conversation flowed easily. No need for pretense. We'd both been publicly humiliated in the same living room. Both discovered our instincts had been right all along. He told me about watching Scarlett's face light up when Mason called, about being told he was too sensitive or too jealous. About the slow erosion of trust when someone constantly makes you doubt yourself. It was like listening to my own experiences, reflected from a different angle. We'd been living parallel nightmares, both manipulated and gaslit by people who claimed to love us. Through mutual friends and occasional social media observations, I learned that Mason and Scarlett did try to make a real relationship work after their divorces were set in motion. The predictability of it was almost funny. Once their connection was no longer forbidden, no longer secret. Once they had to deal with actual relationship logistics instead of stolen emotional moments and late-night texts, the fantasy collapsed under the weight of mundane reality. They lasted exactly 4 months. Mutual friends reported growing tensions almost immediately. Scarlett apparently struggled with Mason's financial situation after the divorce settlements. Mason discovered that Scarlett's constant need for attention and validation, which had seemed so endearing when directed at him from a distance, became exhausting when it was his full-time responsibility. The relationship that had seemed so special and deep when conducted through text messages and secret lunches turned out to be mostly illusion when forced into daily existence. They broke up quietly, without the dramatic explosion that had marked the end of our marriages. Just a sad fizzle that proved what I'd suspected all along. What they had wasn't love. It was the thrill of an emotional affair. The validation of being someone's secret priority. The knowledge that Mason and Scarlett's relationship had imploded so spectacularly gave me a strange sense of closure. Not satisfaction, exactly, though there was an element of vindication. More like confirmation that my instincts had been correct all along. What they'd had wasn't a deep, transcendent connection. It was fantasy and escapism dressed up as friendship. And it couldn't survive exposure to ordinary reality. 6 months after that explosive Saturday night, I sat in Victoria's downtown office, signing the final divorce papers. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished conference table. Victoria had negotiated a settlement more favorable than I'd expected. Mason agreed to split our savings evenly, let me keep the apartment, and even pay half my legal fees. Victoria suspected his unusual generosity stemmed from wanting to end proceedings quickly before more details of his relationship with Scarlett became public. His colleagues and family were already asking uncomfortable questions. Prolonging it would only invite more scrutiny he couldn't afford. I signed my name on page after page, watching my signature legally transform me back into just Arya Montgomery. No hyphenated name, no legal ties to Mason. Each signature felt like closing a door I'd been trying to shut for months. When I signed the last page, Victoria smiled. Congratulations. You're officially divorced. I shook her hand, gathered my copies, and walked out, carrying a folder that officially ended one chapter of my life and began another. I'd expected this moment to feel heavier.
Sadder.
An echo of grief for the marriage I'd believed in. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I'd finally removed a heavy winter coat I'd been wearing for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to move freely. The afternoon sun seemed brighter, warmer on my skin, carrying the promise that comes with genuine new beginnings. My weekly coffee meetings with Elijah had continued throughout the divorce. What started as mutual support between two people who'd survived similar betrayals gradually evolved into something more complicated. We met every Wednesday afternoon at the same downtown cafe. At first, our conversations centered on processing the trauma. We compared notes on gaslighting tactics, traded stories about red flags we'd ignored, found comfort in being understood by someone who'd lived through the exact same nightmare. But somewhere around the third month, our conversations shifted. Less about past pain, more about present lives and future possibilities. Elijah mentioned a promotion, new responsibilities he found exciting. I talked about a freelance design client who gave me creative freedom I hadn't experienced in years. We discovered shared interests that had nothing to do with our failed marriages. Old black and white films. Hiking trails that were slightly difficult to find, rewarding us with solitude and views. Quiet mornings where silence felt comfortable. One Wednesday afternoon in early spring, Elijah suggested we meet for dinner instead of coffee. The way he asked made it clear this was a different kind of invitation. A shift from friendly support to something more intentional. There's a new Italian place that opened downtown, he said. A hint of nervousness I found endearing. I thought maybe we could try it together if you're interested. I looked at this quiet man. He understood, without explanation, what it felt like to be gaslit. We were both gun-shy, both carrying damage that would take time to heal. But we'd built something honest between us. A foundation based on truth instead of illusion. I'd like that, I said. We took things slowly.
But the foundation felt different this time. Solid.
In ways my marriage to Mason never had.
Been.
I ran into Mason unexpectedly about 8 months after our divorce was finalized. I was in the grocery store produce section, reaching for a bag of organic apples, when another hand reached for the same bag. We both pulled back, started to apologize, then recognized each other. Mason looked different. Older. More worn. New lines around his eyes, the kind that come from stress and difficult realizations. More gray in his hair. He'd lost weight, not in a healthy way. We stood there awkwardly, neither of us sure what the protocol was. Arya, he said finally. How are you? I kept my answer simple, honest. I'm good. Working on interesting design projects, enjoying the apartment, building a life that feels right. Mason nodded, something that might have been genuine happiness crossing his face. I'm glad you're doing well. He looked like he wanted to say something more, wrestling with words. Finally, he spoke quietly, almost too soft to hear over the grocery store noise. I made mistakes. A lot of them. I handled our marriage poorly. I wish I'd listened when you tried to tell me the truth about my relationship with Scarlett. The apology was real. I could hear that. But it came far too late. Some things can't be unsaid. Some damage can't be undone. I appreciated the acknowledgement, but felt nothing beyond that. No anger anymore. No hurt. Just recognition that this was a person I used to know who taught me important lessons about boundaries and self-trust. I appreciate you saying that, I replied. There was a pause. Then I asked because some part of me was curious about their story. How's Scarlett? Mason's expression closed off immediately, his face shutting down. We broke up months ago. Turns out what we had didn't translate well into an actual relationship. Once it wasn't secret anymore. He laughed, without humor. I'm living in a studio apartment across town, working through my own process of figuring out who I am outside the fantasy I'd been maintaining. We parted cordially, both aware that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. They can only be acknowledged as part of the landscape that shaped us. Today, I live in an apartment that no longer carries any trace of Mason or our marriage. I redecorated completely, erasing visual reminders, replacing them with choices that reflect only my taste. Bookshelves hold novels I want to read. Walls feature art that speaks to me. Furniture arranged for my comfort. The silence here isn't lonely. It's peaceful. The sound of a life reclaimed. Of boundaries respected. Of truth spoken without apology. Elijah and I are still taking things slow. Still rebuilding trust. But what we're building feels different this time. Honest. Based on respect. Built between two people who understand the value of truth because we both paid the price for living in lies. I think about that night sometimes, that explosive apology that detonated multiple lives in Scarlett's carefully staged living room. Part of me still wonders if I could have handled it differently. More privately. With less public devastation. But mostly, I understand that some truths need to be spoken loudly. They need to be witnessed by everyone affected by the lies. Mason wanted me to kneel and apologize for hurting Scarlett's feelings. I gave him exactly what he demanded. I just made sure the apology revealed every uncomfortable truth he'd been working so hard to hide. The moral crystallized clearly over these months of rebuilding. Never force an apology from a woman who speaks truth. Because women like me don't apologize for seeing clearly. We apologize for staying silent too long. And when we finally speak, we burn down every carefully constructed lie. Mason learned too late that forcing someone to apologize is only a victory if you control what they're apologizing for. I didn't bow. I weaponized truth. And in doing so, I reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is refuse to pretend anymore. The silence I live in now isn't the silence of submission. It's the silence of peace that comes after you finally stop carrying other people's lies and start living in the clear, bright light of your own truth. Music begins to swell, ending and CTA. If this story of calculated truth and powerful self-reclamation had you completely captivated, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was watching Mason's face when he realized his apology plan had completely backfired. What was your favorite moment in the story? Tell me in the comments below. I really want to hear what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.